I'd like to go ahead and jump into a discussion about data, and we've already received several questions about this. It sounds like machine learning is going to require sponsors and CROs to have a lot of historical data. Have most companies through the years been saving and storing the data that they will need, or is that going to be another problem that we're going to have to overcome before we can even get into implementing AI and machine learning solutions? And Elvin, I'll go ahead and jump back to you to start this discussion. Is one of the problems we're going to have that companies just don't have all of the data that they're going to need to use this?
Yeah, for sure. They don't today have all the data. I think that it's multifold in the sense that, especially when we talk about operational data, clinical and safety data that have been collected electronically and in a permanent form and standard form for decades now. But it's when we get into the operational data, things like enrollment figures, site that's succeeding, most of that have historically been collected in Excel and Word, and in best case scenarios are transcribed into systems like a CTMS, and in some cases the trial master file. So part of the problem is that it's collected not in a high quality and often not even what matters. And the other element of it is the way basically we do things like the clinical development plan, where we don't have a system. So the investment in systems and collection of data have generally been done after the patient have been enrolled. Where today, where you really want to make a difference, it's much, much earlier in the process for the decisions and what you're basing it on. So the clinical development plan and the protocol itself. So today we're trying to do maybe NLP on the protocol, where it would be much better off we capture the data structured. The interesting thing is, as I see it, probably one of the best sources that can be tapped into is things like clinicaltrial.gov, where it actually have been standardized across most companies and standards. So I think that's a good example of how data should be structured, that it haven't, that you can then use to predict on in the future. Without data, you don't have the baseline to do it. But that should be enough now in clinical trial management systems to do predictions on, for instance, enrollment. There are other objectives such as quality, patient engagement, and other things you want to answer that we don't have always the data today to support.
There's a lot of data that exists within pharma companies that are not available to other companies. And I think any company implementing a machine learning type solution, the more data, the better. So Alex, I'll jump to you with this one, and I want to get to a couple of the others as well. One person, Greg, asked, how do you partner with life science companies to get them to share clinical trial data so that we can build these databases and start implementing these AI and machine learning models? How do we go about doing that? I can't see individual companies going to other companies and requesting their data. It almost seems to be a situation where this has to happen at a higher level, where maybe a Transcelerate or somebody like that gets involved and makes it possible for companies to share data with each other. There may already be some of that going on, but is that going to be necessary for us to move forward with this?
Well, again, I think I want to resonate with Elvin. There is a lot of data available via clinicaltrials.gov. And the government is very active in making the clinical trials data as transparent and accessible as possible. And as a matter of fact, those efforts led to the digitization and sharing of quite substantial amount of data that is now available in a standardized format. And what we see is that the internal resources that are available to big pharma companies in terms of the clinical trial data are, of course, very valuable. But if you are talking about AI and machine learning generalizing over many trials and learning from many trials, in clinicaltrials.gov you get hundreds of thousands of trials, and and sometimes not even that is not enough to be able to generalize some pattern and learn some and train a model to predict something that you really want, and to identify some of the critical features for a specific therapeutic area or specific set of targets. And the problem with clinical trials and pharmaceutical industry in general is massive heterogeneity of projects. So every project is different. So it's not like it's not like AI for manufacturing, where a lot of processes are the same, and you just need to have a lot of data to be able to capture the fundamental pattern that you want to get replicated or predicted. So very often the pharmaceutical companies have much more data, but this data is pretty much useless for predicting the future. If you are falling outside of a very specific therapeutic area or target. So I think we need to play with the data we have, and clinicaltrials.gov is a great place to start. We need to applaud the U.S. government back in the 80s for making the effort to make all of this data available, both research data, open research data sharing and clinical data sharing. So now I can request some of these data sets from the pharmaceutical companies because in some cases they're required by the authorities to provide this data whenever I need this data. But very often for making simple predictions, I don't need their data. So the usefulness of the data and the kind of data economics for clinical trials outcomes prediction, if you are to predict the clinical trial outcome, in hemophilia, the clinical trial study data from, cancer trials might not be as useful. So it's all about the it's all about finding the right data sets in the publicly available data first, and you need to demonstrate that you can do really, really well with open data first. And publish preferably, and then you can work on the internal data to show that there is additional value, because the data that is in the open is extremely valuable already, and it's standardized, it's digitized, and unfortunately we're of course missing a lot of data, like for example, blood tests from patients of clinical trials. That would help us a lot. So specific biomarker data, again, as Elvin pointed out, so some of the data like specific individual centers that perform operational data that is missing. So, and that could be very useful to also understand where to do the trials. But I think the CROs, and I see that there are quite a bit of participants from Covance, IQVIA, et cetera, in this event. So they have a lot for Excel. They have a lot of that operational data internally. So I think that clinical trial operators, they have the most data. It's not the pharmaceutical companies. And they have a lot of competitive advantage. But I haven't seen to date any good publication in peer-reviewed journals or even like on archive where they would use even openly available data to do something useful with a clinical study. And we do publish quite a bit of those prophetic examples, just to show how the algorithms can perform as well, and what is the direction. So I think that we need to first show that the algorithms can perform very well on open data, and then look at incremental improvements that the internal data would give you. So that I think there is more need for benchmarking and competition in this field. I don't see a lot of competition. That's the problem.